AITA for telling my husband that our kids won't be forced to watch superhero and geeky movies? Let me clarify something from the very beginning. My husband, 30 years old, and I, 28 years old, share a deep, almost obsessive love for all things geeky. It's no exaggeration to say that our entire relationship blossomed around this mutual passion: superhero movies, comic books, video games, you name it. Our first real conversations were about whether Batman or Spider-Man was the superior hero, and somehow that trivial debate sparked something more. This year, for our anniversary, he gave me a limited edition Batman Who Laughs statue, a gift that perfectly encapsulates how well he understands me. So, when I say that we are both fans of this world, I mean it. Not just as a hobby, but as the very foundation of our connection. But there's one thing we hadn't anticipated: how our shared interests would impact our family dynamic, particularly when it came to our two young children, our daughter, Sarah, 6 years old, and our son, Luca, 4 years old. Both of them, in their own way, have taken to the idea of family movie night with an enthusiasm that's contagious. They love the idea of choosing whatever movie their little hearts desire from our collection. And we all huddle together on the couch, wrapped in blankets, popcorn scattered everywhere, to watch it. It's a small, treasured ritual in our home, and we've always supported their choices. The movie doesn't have to be highbrow or critically acclaimed. It's about them enjoying it. But the other night, when they chose Barbie, Swan Lake, I noticed a change in my husband's behavior. As the movie played on the screen, he seemed to grow more and more disinterested. It wasn't just the typical eye roll or the subtle shifting in his seat. No, this time he was huffing audibly, exhaling sharply, his face a picture of discomfort. His general displeasure was impossible to ignore. Sarah and Luca tried to make the best of it, giggling at the animated swans and pretending to be enchanted by the story. But after the credits rolled, they both turned to him, their little faces tight with concern. "Sorry, Dad," Sarah said hesitantly. "We won't pick something like that again." They ran off to bed in a hurry, as though the entire experience had left them embarrassed, like they had somehow failed him. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, unsure of what to say, but I couldn't ignore the pang of disappointment in my chest. They had apologized, and it wasn't their fault. They hadn't done anything wrong. So, when my husband and I were alone, I finally asked, "What's wrong? You didn't want to watch one of the old Barbie movies? Or is something bothering you from work today?" I was trying to keep it light, but I could tell he was seething, his frustration building behind his calm exterior. Without missing a beat, he snapped, "When are we going to have them start watching good movies, like Avengers or hell, even Justice League?" His words hit me like a slap. I wasn't prepared for that. I chuckled nervously, trying to diffuse the tension, like we usually do. "I thought we didn't talk about Justice League," I said, injecting some amusement into my voice, but deep down, something inside me shifted. This wasn't a joking matter. There was a bitterness in his tone that I hadn't anticipated, and his next words crushed whatever remaining humor was left in the room. "They're old enough to sit down and watch these far better movies than whatever trash you grew up with," he said, his voice harsh and final. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't even process what he had said. It was the kind of remark that cuts deep, that makes you question your entire relationship. He had never spoken so disparagingly about the things I loved as a child. Things that shaped who I was, things that I wanted to pass on to our children. His words stung, and for the first time I felt a wave of anger flood over me. How could he dismiss my childhood so easily, as if it was some meaningless thing? As if our kids didn't have the right to experience it? Trying to collect myself, I responded, my voice barely steady. "I don't want them to have to watch what we think is better. I want them to choose. I want them to find out what they like on their own. Just like I give them the choice to read my comics or play the games I enjoy, I want them to feel that freedom." I was firm, almost pleading with him to understand. I let them decide for themselves, as long as it's not too disturbing, too scary, or, let's be real, too mature for them. He stared at me, his eyes narrowed in frustration. "But that's the point. I don't want them to grow up like that. I don't want them to settle for Barbie and Minecraft when there are far more meaningful things they could be doing, learning, experiencing. I want them to have something in common with me, not just a bloodline, but actual interests. I could feel the walls closing in. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a fundamental difference in how we viewed our children's upbringing. But why does it have to be your interests? I shot back. Why can't we let them explore on their own terms? Why does everything have to revolve around you? Why can't we trust them to develop their own tastes without feeling like they're disappointing you? I felt the heat rise in my chest as I spoke, my frustration bubbling over. There were so many things I wanted to say, but I wasn't sure he was listening. The conversation was spiraling, and it felt like there was no way to reel it back in. He refused to let them borrow his comics, constantly scolding them when they asked, and he never, ever played video games with them. Yet, he expected them to fall in line with his idea of what they should enjoy. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I want them to feel like they can make their own decisions. And I don't think that's wrong. What's so wrong about that? His eyes softened slightly, but the stubbornness in his voice didn't waver. I just want to have something in common with them. Something other than the fact that we're family. I sighed, my voice quiet but resolute. I'd rather they discover their own interests, in their own time, at their own pace. If we try to force them into something they're not ready for, we'll only make them feel like they're doing something wrong, and I don't want that. There was a long silence between us after that, one that felt heavier than any argument I had ever had with him. He was angry, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't used to hearing me stand my ground like this, especially not so firmly, but I needed him to understand. I needed him to see that what I was asking wasn't unreasonable. It wasn't about rejecting him. It was about giving our children the freedom to be themselves. So I asked, hesitantly, am I the asshole here? Is this all wrong? Am I overreacting? But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about Barbie or Avengers. It was about how we wanted to shape our children's lives, how we were trying, clumsily, awkwardly, to navigate the vast landscape of parenthood. We were both struggling to find our way. But the only thing I could be sure of was that our children's happiness, their agency, and their joy had to come first. Why not take turns choosing movies between adults and children? My husband and I had agreed on this system before things escalated to this point. We had both thought it was a fair way to involve the kids in the decision-making process, and more importantly, to help them learn that sometimes the choices they make won't always be what they expect. That's perfectly okay, we believed. It would teach them valuable lessons about disappointment, compromise, and understanding. It was supposed to create a safe space where they could express themselves freely, where their preferences were acknowledged, but also where they could learn to appreciate the bigger picture beyond their own immediate desires. At least, that was the goal. In theory, it all sounded so simple. The plan was for everyone to have a chance to contribute, to share the joy of movie night equally. And yet, here we were, completely derailed by something as trivial as a Barbie movie. I was trying to hold on to the original purpose of our agreement, but things were beginning to slip out of my control. Has this happened before? My friend asked when I explained the situation. I had to stop and think for a moment before replying. Once, I admitted. It happened with Lego Batman because he didn't like Bruce's characterization in it. That was a different kind of disagreement, one that, though still unpleasant, I could at least understand. He was disappointed with the movie, but it didn't feel as personal. This time, though, it was a whole different level. I had tried so hard to keep things lighthearted, not to make a big deal of it, but I could feel the tension growing between us. Why wait until Saturday to talk to him? My friend asked, sensing the frustration in my voice. Why not address it now? The answer was complicated. I have severe anxiety, and that makes it difficult for me to confront situations head on. I like having a plan in place, a backup in case things don't go as expected. I don't like going into any confrontation without knowing exactly how I will handle it. And truthfully, I don't think I'm ready to have that conversation yet. I need the time to collect my thoughts, to calm my nerves. Saturday, I thought, would give me the space to prepare myself. On top of that, both of our kids would be out of the house that day. Sarah at school, Luca at daycare. It would give us a quiet moment, an opportunity to speak without their innocent eyes watching. If he tries again before then, though, there will be consequences. He'll be out. For good. I don't care if it's a rash decision. My name is on the mortgage, and if he doesn't come to his senses, he won't be allowed back. I've made up my mind. There's no more second chances for this kind of behavior. Not after what happened. Not after how he's been treating our children's interests as if they don't matter. Kids' favorite comics? My friend continued, eager to distract me from the firestorm brewing inside. What do they like to read? It was a bittersweet question. My son Luca has developed a real affection for the Tim Drake Robin comics. He's fascinated by the character's quick wit, his bravery, and the way he balances his responsibilities as both a child and a superhero. Meanwhile, my daughter Sarah has latched onto my Nightwing collection. She loves the acrobatics, the sense of freedom in Dick Grayson's movements, the way he uses his body as an extension of his will. It's sweet, and I can see the joy in their faces as they flip through the pages of my old comics. But here's the thing. I'm starting to wonder if my husband even understands this joy. I'm starting to wonder if he can see how important these moments are for them. We're still waiting to see if they'll gravitate toward any other stories I have, or if we'll end up buying new comics for them, things they might connect with more. But right now, it's all I can do to make sure they feel supported, that their choices aren't being dismissed or invalidated. To say I'm pissed would be an understatement. I'm sitting in my son's room as I write this, in the dark with only the faint glow of the nightlight illuminating the space. Luca is still awake, still trembling after waking up from a nightmare that he refuses to talk about. He's been quiet all night, his little face contorted in fear as he lies there, clutching his blanket like it's the only thing that makes him feel safe. No, there were no horror games today, no frightening images or creepy stories. But whatever happened, whatever he's afraid of, seems to have rooted itself deeply in his heart. It's almost unbearable. My chest feels tight and my heart aches for him. His fear is palpable and it's starting to override my own fear of confrontation. He keeps glancing nervously towards our bedroom door, his eyes darting like a rabbit caught in a snare, his body stiff and on edge. That's how I can tell. I know my son too well to ignore the signs. He's scared. And that fear is far bigger than any argument between his father and me. I don't know how much longer I can stay in this marriage if this behavior continues. It's not just about the movies or the comics, it's about my kids' safety, their mental well-being. If my husband can't see that, if he can't apologize to them for his treatment of their interests, then maybe divorce is something we'll have to consider. I don't want to get to that point. I don't want to have to make this decision. But right now, it feels like I'm being forced into a corner, and I'm not sure how much longer I can stay here pretending that everything is fine when it's not. If I had to choose between staying in a marriage that's slowly poisoning the environment for my kids, or giving them a life with divorced parents who are still loving and supportive, I'd choose the latter in a heartbeat. I hate that it's come to this. I wish it didn't have to come to this. But I will not let my children grow up like I did, walking on eggshells, constantly second-guessing their every choice, afraid to speak up. I refuse. I'm waiting until Saturday, when the kids will be gone, to have that conversation with him. And when it happens, if he hasn't changed, if he hasn't apologized for the way he's been treating our family, then I'll know what I have to do. Update 2. When I walked into the living room, my husband was sitting there, the dim light from the desk lamp casting shadows over his anxious face. He didn't look at me as I approached, but I could feel the tension in the air, as if everything was about to explode. I sighed, trying to keep my calm, but inside, a storm was rising, pulling me into a world I couldn't control. "We need to talk," I said coldly, trying to keep my anger in check. He finally lifted his head, his eyes clouded, as if he were looking for a way to avoid the truth I was about to reveal. "What are you going to do?" he asked, but his voice lacked the usual confidence. "What have you done?" I countered, the tension in the room breaking like a crashing wave hitting me full force. "Do you think you have the right to decide what my children watch, what they like, without respecting them?" He was silent for a moment, then spoke softly but arrogantly. "I just want them to grow up with taste, to have a proper view of this world. Not trivial, childish things like Barbie movies or Minecraft games." The calm inside me shattered. Do you know that the things you consider trivial are exactly what help my children find themselves? What makes them feel happy and safe? You think you're doing the right thing, but you're teaching them to give up what they love just to meet a standard that you set. He stood up, his body tense like a wild animal cornered. So what are you going to do? You want me to apologize? I'm not that kind of person, and I don't understand why you're reacting like this. I just want them to be better. That's not the way to make them better. My voice trembled with anger, but I couldn't stop. You want to change them, but you don't respect them. You don't understand that they need space to grow, to make their own decisions, instead of being forced into a mold you think is right. I stepped closer, my eyes filled with disappointment. You've hurt them. They're afraid of you. My son won't even look me in the eye whenever you're near. Don't you see that? He didn't respond immediately. His eyes flickered as if the words I had just said were starting to sink in. But then he turned away, his voice no longer sharp. I don't know what to do anymore. I just want to be a good father. You can't be a good father if you don't know how to love and respect your children, not just love them the way you think is best for them, I said, my voice like a declaration of war. And if you can't do that, then I can't let you keep doing this. I've put up with enough. He stood still, his eyes now tired, as if everything was slowly breaking apart in front of him. I could see him struggling with himself, but I couldn't allow him to keep avoiding his responsibility. My children needed a father who could understand them, respect them, not one who only knew how to impose his will. You need to change, I said, my voice dry, as if all my strength had been drained. And if you can't change, I don't know where I'll go from here. We stood there in silence. Only the ticking of the clock echoed like hammer blows against my heart. I knew maybe everything would never go back to the way it was. Update 3. One cold morning, after our daughter and son had been dropped off at school and daycare, I returned to the living room, where my husband was still sitting, looking tired and dazed. I thought he would continue his silence, but an unexpected conversation began when the kids returned. My son, still half asleep, walked into the living room. He didn't say anything at first, but was immediately drawn to the figure of my husband, someone he had rarely faced in the quiet of this room. My son's eyes stole a glance at him, as if trying to gauge whether there was still patience left in my husband for them.
Dad, my son began, his voice soft but full of curiosity. Do you not like the movies me and sister like?
My husband was momentarily taken aback, looking down at our son with a sad expression on his face. He didn't answer immediately, but simply sat in silence, gazing into our son's innocent eyes. Finally, he leaned down, his gaze heavy with thought. It's not that I don't like them. I just want you to see other movies, things I think are better. My son fell silent, still watching him, as though he didn't quite understand the meaning behind his father's words. Just then, our daughter entered the room, her bright eyes full of energy. Unlike her usual rush, she approached slowly and sat down next to her father. Dad, she spoke up, her voice soft but resolute. But we like Barbie and Minecraft, and you don't want to watch them with us. Don't you feel happy when we're happy? Her words struck my husband like a blow to his conscience. He exhaled deeply, as though the truth of her statement echoed through a space he couldn't deny. A long silence followed, the atmosphere heavy and oppressive. I don't not want to have fun with you guys, he finally spoke, but his voice wavered, losing its strength. I just don't want you to be limited to easy stuff. I want you to understand more about the world outside, about bigger things. My daughter blinked, then raised her head to look at him, her clear eyes full of the defiance of childhood. But do you understand, Dad? The world out there you talk about might just be part of us. We also want fun movies and games without them being too complicated or grand. My son sighed deeply, shaking his head. You always tell us to grow up, but we're growing up in our own way. Why can't you like what we like? My husband stood up, but didn't rush to leave the room. He just stood there, staring at his children, stunned. I could see the pain in his eyes, but at the same time, there was a flicker of realization beginning to appear. He bent down, picked up one of my daughter's comic books, flipped through a few pages, then placed it back on the table. I'm sorry, kids, he said, his voice low, filled with what sounded like regret. I was wrong. My daughter looked up, her eyes softening a little.
You don't have to apologize,
She said.
just understand us.
My husband stood still for a moment, then turned toward me, his gaze no longer tense like before. He lowered his head slightly, as if realizing that what he had been searching for wasn't a change from the kids, but a change within himself. I'll try, he whispered, his voice gentle. I'll try to understand you both better. And though I couldn't immediately forget everything that had happened, in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope flicker, fragile, and not enough to change everything just yet. Update 4. Since that day, things have gradually started to change, though it hasn't always been smooth sailing. My husband began to spend more time learning about our children's interests, the movies they loved, the games they were passionate about. He started watching the Barbie movies with them, movies he once considered trivial, and although it was a bit awkward at first, it was clear that he was making an effort. Sometimes I even saw him chuckling along with our daughter while watching an episode of Barbie Dreamhouse Adventures, a rare but genuine smile. My son, though he still often glanced toward our bedroom door whenever my husband was nearby, gradually began to feel more at ease. He started engaging in more relaxed conversations, playing Minecraft with me and his father, without the fear or tension that once hung over him. Our conversations after dinner became lighter, no longer burdened by silence but filled with carefree questions about the imagined worlds in their games and the superhero stories that my husband and I would tell the children. As for me, though the tension in our marriage had not entirely disappeared, I felt a sense of relief. Watching him change little by little, even if those changes were small, gave me hope. It wasn't a miracle or an abrupt transformation, but I realized that we could rebuild everything through constant effort and listening to each other. One morning, as we were having breakfast together, my husband looked at me and then smiled genuinely, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "Thank you for giving me the chance to change and to understand the kids better. I know I was wrong, but I'll try to do better, for them and for you." I nodded and took his hand, but didn't say anything. Deep down, I knew that change would never be easy, but there was one thing I was certain of. If we kept working together, trying to understand and respect each other, then our marriage could overcome this challenge. In the end, it wasn't the conclusion to our story, but rather a turning point, a new beginning. For me, that was the most important thing. We, as a family, would learn to love and respect each other, not only as husband and wife, but also as parents and children. And that, I hoped, would help my children grow up to be individuals who listen, understand, and love themselves. Update 5. After some time, the atmosphere in the house began to warm up. The tensions that once hung in the air between my husband and me slowly faded, replaced by mutual understanding and lighter steps in our daily lives. My husband, though still sometimes awkward, had learned to share space with the kids, allowing them to truly feel love, not through invisible pressures to be better or bigger. One summer evening, we sat together in the cozy living room that I had once found so cold. The soft golden light from the lamp illuminated the dining table, where homemade pizzas we had prepared together sat. My husband sat next to our son, watching once again the Minecraft world we had built long ago. Our daughter and I were playing Animal Crossing, with the cute animals busy in our little village. "Dad, what are we going to do next time?" my son asked, his voice full of excitement. My husband smiled, this time genuinely, not out of obligation, but because he was truly enjoying this moment with his child. "Next time, we'll build an even bigger city in Minecraft, and I'll help you create the tallest buildings in the world." Our daughter looked up at him, her gaze full of confidence, and said, "Then you have to play Animal Crossing with me too. I need your help making an even prettier garden." My husband looked at me, a bit surprised, as if he had never thought he could blend into his children's world in this way. He looked into our daughter's bright eyes, then turned to me with a look of appreciation. Maybe I was wrong thinking you only needed to watch big movies. What matters is making happy memories together. I smiled, feeling lighter in my heart. We weren't perfect, but we were learning to love and listen to each other. Things didn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. And perhaps this was exactly what I needed the most. A family that doesn't always have the answers, but always knows how to listen and try to do better. I no longer felt fear in my heart when facing him. Instead, I found I could hope, even if only a little. Hope that, with each small step we took, we would find a way to build a family where everyone feels loved and respected. Sometimes, it's in these simple moments that we truly realize the value of love. Not something grand or distant, but genuine care in every little action. And perhaps that is what makes us stronger, even though challenges will always appear on the road ahead.